Hello, my name is Chris Wright. I'm a practicing artist, writer and researcher. I exhibit both nationally and internationally. During this motivational talk, I will answer questions if they're very relevant as they pop up. Otherwise, I'll answer them at the end. If the video appears to wobble a little bit, it's not your fault. It's because I live in a narrow boat and this morning there was a little bit of wind and flow of the river, which tends to make it shift about a little bit. So some of this talk will be read and some of it improvised. I have a nice crib sheet just next to me so I can keep looking at it. So I'll start off with, what sort of artist am I? Well, I'm a conceptual artist. I work with ideas, and those ideas are often to do with sound, but not exclusively so. I'm not generally a selling artist, but I exhibit work in galleries. I present sets of proposals that are for further questioning. So it's not necessarily work that I would consider ever finished, but that will ask more questions. So I gather sound. I gather words that are overheard, dropped conversations, activities from everyday life, echoes and silences. Sound is often part of an installation. And this may include the journals from the conception of the work, because I think how I get to the work is actually really important. So I'll begin with a little bit about how I got to this point in my art life. My working life has always been in the creative industries, but not really in art, although I used to do quite a lot of art workshops, mostly for children, but some adults. But I've always been an art dabbler. You know, I would take any sorts of materials that just happened to be hanging around and create something, whether it would be some sort of paint based or sculpture. So in about 2001, there was a lull in the work that I was actually doing in my creative work, and I thought I'd just go up to an evening class. So I went to the local college and I was just stood in the foyer, and I was very shy. As a school dropout, I really had a bit of a horror of education. But I was holding this leaflet about an HND fine art when the tutor came up to me and said, would I like an interview, as his interviewee had not turned up. So in my car I happened to have 6 drawings. I can't even remember the reason why. So with these 6 drawings and a bucket load of wild ideas, I managed to get on the course, and I was actually amazed, and I still now don't even know what this tutor saw in me that I didn't see in myself. So the H&D is a little bit like a foundation course. So it means that you get to do a bit of everything. It's modular. So I had to do sculpture and printing and Photoshop, all sorts of stuff like that I would never have had the chance to do otherwise, because you actually can't afford the equipment, and colleges and universities are wonderful places for having all the equipment you could ever think you might want. So after that, I thought I would extend it slightly and turn it into a degree. And I ended up going to Staffordshire University for 1 year and got a BA Fine Art. But I'm afraid it didn't end there. I actually found I loved learning. I loved being in that environment, and I loved spending so much of my days doing something that I'd always wanted to do. So in 2013, I graduated with a PhD in fine art and philosophy. And during that time I worked. I wasn't funded. I just worked and worked at my art every day, all weekends, early morning, late at night. But it was actually absolutely wonderful, and I'd do it all again. But the moral of this, of course, is just don't give up on your ideas. Follow your dreams. Don't think you're too old. You don't know where it'll lead. Of course, I am a very late starter. I was a very late starter. And ideally, in an ideal world, I would have actually done it sooner. But I have no regrets there. So my motivation came from a really deeply held desire to learn. And I've always taken every opportunity I could to add new skills. For example, welding. Well, it's not come in particularly useful since, and it really hasn't improved my soldering skills, which is something I do now. I also did, for example, medium format photography. That's not something I would ever use. But everything that I did has had an influence on my practice, and those original skills really have contributed to a part of a whole. They've not been wasted. So from about 2008, I think I started the first course in 2001 or 2, I think. 2002. So I took all the opportunities, even before I graduated, to present and show my work. I have since learnt to be more picky and about what I apply for, but sometimes it's just important to take a chance. You just don't know. Particular highlights have been a self-directed residency that took place on the back of a conference, my very first conference. This was really a high-profile conference in New Zealand, and I knew that I wasn't going to get funding for this. I often don't get funding for very much at all, so I just work and subsidise my own artwork in some ways, which is not the best situation, but it works for me. So I went to New Zealand and I took that opportunity to extend my research. I just started my PhD then, and my PhD was about borders and non-places. And borders, of course, includes things like littoral zones of islands. So I took the opportunity to visit a lot of islands, and on the way back from New Zealand I stopped in Thailand and spent a whole month doing this sort of self-directed residency, which the highlight was floating paper boats down the centre of the Mekong River. So the Mekong River flows from China right the way down to Cambodia, and I tried to follow it from the border of North Thailand to the Cambodia border. It meant negotiating with boatmen in a non-common language, drawing on in the earth with a stick to try and make understand each other. But in the end I floated these paper boats at what was supposed to be the centre of the river, which was on the map the official borderline, for example, between Thailand and Laos and Cambodia. So all this was taking absolutely huge risk in terms of time away from my course, time away from work. It was a huge amount of money, and of course it was a huge risk art-wise. You know, I didn't really know what I was doing. I often work very instinctively and intuitively and just see what happens. But that piece of work was one of the absolute most important things that I have done. So a little bit later, 2009, I thought I was on the way up. I had an exhibition with Rachel Whiteread and Cornelia Parker at the Leeds Met Gallery in Leeds. I thought I'd found a gallery that liked my work, a sort of mentor in the gallerist. But it turned out that the gallery was closing down with the very next exhibition, and it was no longer funded. But these ups and downs, they're all part of the world of being an artist, and it's very hard, especially in the beginning, to take these continual knockbacks. Even now, if I get maybe 2 or 3 rejections in one day, I do end up being a little bit upset about it all. But that is the way it is sometimes. You just have to learn how to get over this and not let it affect your work too much. So by the time I graduated, I already had the semblance of an idea of a career and an idea of the career I wanted to have. But since then, I've continued with independent practice and research. Some of this research has been presented at conferences, often alongside my artwork, and this informs and is informed by my research. Both my practice and research actually go hand in hand. And this frequently results in a sort of publication. So I have several sort of essays in books. Unfortunately, most of them are in Italian, apart from my work. So I struggle with reading them through. I can do everyday Italian, but I can't actually read these sort of books very fast. So I exhibit mostly through open calls, which I get from various art websites, and that includes doing residencies as well. But I think it's actually very important to do self-directed residencies, because if you haven't got anything else, that intensity of time is really important, which of course brings me almost up to date. So I'll talk about the year 2019. It was quite a good year last year. It was in terms of development, in terms of me pushing my art practice forward. I took part in Summer Lodge. This is a residency organised by Nottingham Trent University. I'd done it about 5 years previously, and to be fair, it wasn't a huge success, but this time I knew a lot more. But it really proved to be a really important step forward, and I sort of managed to link my sound work with performance, which is something I'd sort of been looking at but wasn't quite sure how to do it. But having these 2 weeks of complete freedom, I just really focused very, very hard on sort of pushing myself forward. So by the time I came to the Artcore's Winter Narratives residency in December, I actually had this sort of huge wealth of things that I actually hadn't quite tested out very much, and I had an idea of what I wanted to do. But I didn't approach Winter Narratives with that in the top of my mind. When I approach a residency, I like to be very open. One of the value of a residency is the intensity, that being able to spend time doing something continuously, especially without any distractions. You don't have to think about the washing up or where you're going to buy food from or what you need. And I find it's actually really, really important to just really focus on being in that space. So I may have an outline of what I wanted to do, and of course you have to have an outline, because all residencies, when they put a call forward, they say, so what are you going to do? Luckily Artcore believed in me at that time, even though actually I probably wasn't the most precise in my path. But it was absolutely brilliant residency, and I got so much out of it, and I would just love to go again. But residencies in general, they're a very good way, especially if you're not working in an art environment full time, to concentrate on your own practice. So for me, it's important that everything is experimental, and that I immerse myself in my new surroundings. When I arrive somewhere, I don't want to know anything. I want just to be. I just want to look around and let the place wash over me. Then, and only then, might I make some tentative steps towards making something. I call it wondering and wondering. It's a gathering of sensual information. In India, I made lots of different types of work. I did some very short films, I did some sound pieces, I did some performative pieces, I did some drawings, some pen and ink drawings, and they're all documented in the blog, which can be seen on the Artcore website. It is quite a open and honest blog. I don't believe in lying to myself. I try and be very truthful about what I'm actually doing, but I also at the same time try not to be absolutely overcritical, otherwise I might never work. It's very important not to edit your thoughts before you actually start. Otherwise you might not start anything, or you limit yourself to a very narrow range of practice. I also don't feel afraid to fail, because I found through experience that the failures, they actually contribute more to your practice and development than successes in the long term, and they expand your understanding of art as a whole, and very in particular your own practice. So coming up to the present day, my approach to what I'm calling opportunity lockdown has been similarly open, and there's been two strands which are linked, of course. Firstly, so I don't get waylaid by cleaning out cupboards and all those little jobs that you think, oh, I've got time to do that now, won't that be fun? Well, it's not fun. And I'm trying very, very hard not to do things like that. But I joined a programme through an open call called 30 Works. Now, 30 Works is a programme where something has to be produced every single day throughout the month of April. If you don't produce something, you are thrown off the programme, as it were. I'll put the website at the end on a comment so you can look at it. So although every day there is a brief, I actually haven't followed it, because I've used it more as a sort of almost like a self-directed residency. However, I have during one day so far actually managed to follow the brief. I didn't mean to, it was just happened, and I actually didn't read the brief till later. So the brief was to produce something monochrome. So I actually produced this sort of just sketch of the grass and reeds blowing in the wind. So that is the only day I've actually done exactly what was expected of me. But mostly it has been small ideas. I feel as I've learnt to play again. I've played with what materials I have. Living on a narrow boat, there are actually I don't have many art materials here. Since my studio closed down about 1.5 years ago, I keep things in a unit and get things when I need them. So I have a very small amount of art materials. So a lot of the things I've done for this 30 Works have been playing around. One day I melted oil pastels and made like a Google Earth landscape, and I propped up twigs in the grass outside and things like that. So they're very, very small ideas in general. However, I think just done one piece that I actually find that's going to be worthwhile and links up the sound piece. I was hoping to get the SoundCloud up, but at the moment I have an advert about financial support, which I can't get rid of. I'll put the link down at the end so everybody can read it. So this piece linked recording birds and using keyboard and very minimal sound to actually not necessarily even respond or anything like that, but immersing myself into the bird song and coming up with some accompaniment, I think I might call it. It was actually quite intuitive and I didn't quite know, but it also fits into work I did at Winter Narratives, where I tried to mimic the bird sound from early morning recordings with a soprano recorder. So although you think you're doing things very freely and openly, when you look back over your practice, it's actually quite interesting that you can actually find these links. And one good thing about the lockdown now is that I can actually hear the bird because there are no traffic. Normally I have to travel further afield. So my second response to the current situation is to begin a self-directed residency at home with another group of artists. Now this group I called Hatchery, and it's a self-selected group, mostly from my peer network. And the ethos is this: Hatchery is a self-directed residency that aims to capitalise on the recent changed circumstances to experiment with new creative approaches. Hatchery wants to use the time to think deeply and differently about my creative practices. It may forge a potentially different direction or add value to what I'm already doing, and while there is significance in evaluating existing practices, I feel it's time to take stock, stripping away superfluity, moving forward rather than just possibly repeating the same thing over and over again. So this is sort of carried out with this group of artists through WhatsApp and Zoom, and we discuss videos, a lot of art videos online. We discuss other people's work and put everything together and just try and be mutually supportive. And this works hand in hand with the 30 works. But not everything, of course, has worked out of what I've done. And I feel as though that actually is important as well, and I'm learning. So what now and for the future? Well, there are still several more weeks of lockdown to go. And my view is that there are still a lot more things to explore very close to home that might instigate something. I know I'm in a favoured situation. There are only 2 of us and we have no children to homeschool. And I've carried out work in very many different and difficult situations before in the past, and I know it's not easy. But even if the few minutes a day is valuable, and some of my 30 work stuff has literally only taken a few minutes. So as an artist, and what is art, I find inspiration in the strangest of places. So to finish, I will read you one of my pieces for 30 works, and it's a letter to the organisers, and it questions the what is art. So, dear 30 works, today I have been for a run, did Duolingo French for 1 hour, did my daily drawing, invented a pasta sauce, read my French verb book for 30 minutes, had a 45-minute French lesson with Eve by Skype, did some art admin, contacting curators, applying, listened to Villa-Lobos's New York skyline melody visualization, posted on my WhatsApp art group, played 1 song with a singer-guitarist on clarinet, played 2 songs with singer-guitarist on harmonica, did a 45-minute yoga, Pilates and strength exercise session, photographed the wind in the trees, recorded the wind in the woods, spent 2 hours making a 30-second composition based on that recording, scrapped that recording, read an academic paper on sound. No, I have not made an artwork today. Very best wishes, Chris. And I sort of put that forward is that so much of what we do is actually creative, and I think we need to be very open and enjoy what we're doing and put our whole heart into it. So thank you very much for listening. I will put comments online. Thank you.